created a village. And this is, as Marc just said, our third salon. Just a reminder to everybody, mute unless, of course, you feel compelled to say something, and that's also fine. I knew the moment that I met Marc that I would pursue him to the ends of the earth to join Sharif and I in holy matrimony. And
no, oh yeah, to join us, not to join us in holy matrimony.
No. He wasn't invited into the marriage, but he was invited to the wedding.
Okay, thank you.
And Marc has very skillfully been guiding Sharif and I deeper into love ever since, which directly affects our children, our family, and our friends. Marc's rather unorthodox code by which he lives upholds the beliefs that I have sought personally for many, many years. And his profound understanding of self, of our unique instrument within the great orchestra of the entire cosmos, speaks intimately to who I am and who I hope to become. Enjoy tonight. Sharif?
Thanks. Well, I just want like everybody to notice that I do have a martini. So this is not serious all the time. It's serious stuff. It's serious enough to have a martini over. Existential risk, I think, equates with martini. So do not hesitate today or in future salons to imbibe with a glass of wine or a martini or whatever your thing is. But I would like to toast everybody. And is Richard out there, by the way? Oh, there's Richard.
Yes, hey, how are you?
Costa Rica. Yeah.
Costa Rica.
Awesome,
Hey.
man. I can see the beach behind you. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I wish it was. I'm trying to get it's a fake background. I'm trying to show the real one, but it's okay.
But it works. You know, you didn't even actually have to say that. Everybody would have bought the whole thing. He is in Costa Rica, though. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. And just one other thing, an aside, an anecdote, is I actually sought out people with IQ, but they also happen to be good looking. Okay, so there are people, smart people that are good looking. That's a great combination. It's very rare, right? So because you commented on how good looking everybody was. So okay, with no further ado, Dr. Gafni, please, the floor is yours.
I won't show up though with the fake background, will I?
Hey everybody, Suzette, you got the mute thing, you got everything going on right? Because we still hear some sound coming through. Right? Maybe it's Sharif, the holy Sharif. We've got to make sure that everyone's muted, otherwise people won't be able to hear. Right? Awesome. Yay.
Marc, can you do something with your volume so we can hear your voice clearer?
Sure. Okay, let's see if we got that going on.
Also, we need to mute Jeff Camlett, please. And Nicole is not muted. Hi, Nicole.
And Dawn, darling. Hi, beauty. Can you mute?
Hi. Am I not on mute?
No, there you are. Now you are.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. So let's just kind of share where we are. Let's just kind of set the context again. So it's now, let's just see what time it is. It's now 7:10 Eastern time. We're going to complete and open for any questions at 8:10, so 60 minutes exactly. But we're going to try and do a world in the 60 minutes. So welcome, everyone. And I want to just get a sense of where we are. So Gabriel and Sharif, my dear friends and dear friends of my partner, Christina, have taken on this very, very wonderful and important lineage role in actually ensuring the future of our planet. They've taken on the chairpersonship of the Center for Integral Wisdom. The center is a think tank which I started together with my dear friend Ken Wilber about a decade ago. And we started the think tank essentially, let me just try and say it in the simplest, gentlest way, to try and prevent human extinction. That's a big deal. And as we started the think tank in response to an entire set of potential catastrophic risks and existential risks, meaning risks to our very existence, risk to the very existence of the future itself. And we started the think tank to kind of plot those risks, number one, but more importantly, to actually plot a navigational path, right? A trajectory through the 11th hour. right, through this potential 11th hour of humanity. We, in the think tank, the Center for Integral Wisdom, and just to maybe note for a second, there's an incredible group of board chairs, right? The first board chair was Lori Galperin, who was one of the characters are based on her in one of the major Netflix series these days, but she's one of the leading edge, I would say, clinical theorists in psychology, right? You know, Vanity Fair's done a bunch of pieces on her, and she's just a really brilliant thinker and clinician. Then John Mackey, right, who's a grocer, started a little grocery shop called Whole Foods. John then got involved, and John was the chair for a whole bunch of years and a dear friend. Followed by Barbara Marx Hubbard, who some of you may know. She just passed away a year ago. And in the New York Times obituary, you know, they quoted Buckminster Fuller, where Bucky said that he thought Barbara was the best informed futurist alive on the planet. So the fourth, right, the fourth board chairs, the fourth set of board chairs are Gabrielle and Sharif. And so it's a very, very special group of people. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, actually, before she passed, just really, I think it was Gabrielle Sharif, just a couple of weeks before she passed, she was at your house, right, for the last board meeting. So it's an incredible group of human beings. The people involved in the center are about 60, 70 people around the world who are each leading edge maverick thinkers in their field. Let me just give you a sense what that means. So John Mackey, for example, is a leading edge thinker in terms of capitalism. I had the privilege of, you know, working with John on a wonderful book that he wrote called Conscious Capitalism, for example. But John's a maverick, right? John's a complex thinker. He's not an easy left winger or right winger or libertarian. He's a complex maverick figure who's also at the leading edge of his field. Lori Galperin, right? As I mentioned earlier, one of the most, you know, brilliant clinicians and thinkers in psychology. Ken Wilber, who's the best read philosopher today in the world, who's both, you know, deeply grounded across disciplines and yet maverick in some way. And by maverick, I mean not conventional, not parroting the party line, whether that's in academia or in, you know, economics or in governance or in infrastructure, right? Or in physics or in molecular biology or in the great traditions. The place I come out of personally, was privileged with Ken to found the think tank, and my particular discipline, I come out of the lineage traditions. So I'm more comfortable in, I don't know, 3rd century Aramaic is kind of where I find my home. And at the same time, I cross disciplines. So meaning I'm reading in physics, right? I'm reading in particle physics, you know, I'm reading in, you know, molecular biology, I'm reading in 5, 6 major schools of Buddhism, you know, the 6 major schools of economics, the 11 major schools of psychology, right? Across political governance theories, right? Across traditions. My native tradition, right, is Hebrew wisdom, or particularly the Aramaic texts of the Kabbalah. But I merge, right, across disciplines, because in order to actually say something today in a way which is cogent and simple, you have to first go complex. And so the language we're going to talk in tonight is going to be what I call second simplicity. And in each of these talks, I'm still going to continue for a little bit, slightly recapitulating where we came from. Think of recapitulation as a symphonic term. We're going to slightly recapitulate just so we can begin to create a field of shared language. But I want to just set up what our context is, what we're trying to accomplish, where we're going. We're interested here not in wisdotainment. Wisdom, entertainment, put them together, wisdotainment. Wisdotainment is lots of fun, right? Totally enjoyable, right? I happen to be exceedingly good at it, right? And who cares, right? Right? I mean, it's uninteresting, right? And as I could give you a wonderfully entertaining, great ride, big deal. Nothing changed, right? You might say, wow, that was fantastic. Big deal, right? Nothing's moved. We're at a place in reality where we have to move the needle. Okay, so we want to move the needle together in a serious and significant way. And in order to do that, we need to articulate a response to existential risk. Right? And existential risk, just really understand it as the risk that there'll be no future. So for example, when we talked about 5, 6 years ago, even 3 years ago at Gabrielle and Sharif's home at our first board meeting that we held here in Miami, And we've since, by the way, Christine and I have moved to Miami to locate the center of the think tank here in Miami, right? Which is a big deal. So our decision was the goal of the think tank, right? The location of the think tank, the context for everything we're doing. If I would give you an analogy, would be something like think Marcello Facinio or Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance. Black Death has just swept Europe. The structures of thought that dominate pre-modernity are falling apart. The new world's not yet here. The old world's collapsing. Death moves across the planet. Of course, without the threat that we're faced by today, because there's no exponential technology. We're in a much more serious situation on 19 different grounds. But it was at least a generally similar situation in which people were living in a time between worlds, in a time between stories. The traditional story was breaking down. There was nothing in its place. Death reigned in Europe. The skull grinned at the banquet. And so Da Vinci and Facinio and this group of people, and by the way, as I mentioned last time, there were not more than 1,000 people at the core of the Renaissance. That's it. What they did is they did the only effective thing you can do to actually participate in the evolution of consciousness. Although this isn't even a language they would have understood then, the evolution of consciousness. But they participated in it. They were directly catalytic to the evolution of consciousness in a fundamental way. What did they do? They told a new story. So I want to get that with you. It's a big deal. The only thing, and this was one of the major conclusions of 10 years of work at the think tank, the only thing that's going to actually allow us to respond to existential risk is the articulation of a new story that raises all boats, that changes the fundamental topography, interior and exterior of reality. So what Da Vinci did is, right, they told a story which we call modernity, right? We call that story modernity. And we all grew up, we're all defined by it. And that story of modernity within 100 years ended slavery. I mean, just think about this for a second. All the great traditions of spirituality didn't manage to end slavery. Just think about that. It's kind of a shocking fact, right? All the great traditions, they didn't. There was human slavery all over the world in every system. Along comes this new story called modernity. Within 100 years, slavery ends all over the world. Wow, that's dramatic, right? Universal human rights comes from modernity. The scientific method comes from modernity. The emergence of the feminine comes from modernity. The reclaiming of embodiment, the body and the place of the body comes from modernity, right? The notion of evolution, that there's an evolutionary trajectory to history, comes from modernity, right? So there's this new story that's told, and that new story raises all boats, right? Affects a massive transformation in the world, and in many ways is enormously successful, simply in the exponentialization of life, right? 150 years ago, you have X amount of people on the planet, right? 500 million, give or take. Today, we've got 7.7 billion. Just think about that. Just the exponentialized explosion of life. And to the extent that life is a value, which it is, right? So you have exponentially more life on the planet. That's just a shocking realization, right? Embodiment and joy and possibility and possible creativity, right? And et cetera, et cetera. So, right, you've got modern medicine. You've got literature of enormous forms. You've got new forms of beauty. You have new investigations of knowledge, of gnosis. There's an enormous amount of good that emerged from modernity. And yet, and stay with me, right? Let's just stay really close to this. I want to get the frame right. But you notice if you're here the last couple of weeks, I'm doing it right a little slower. It's going a little slower. Let's get the frame right. Right? There were fault lines in the story of modernity. And the fault lines in that story are still there. And the fault lines in the story of modernity brought us to this moment of civilizational potential collapse. Now, you may think that's a dramatic thing to say, potential civilizational collapse. Well, study history. Every great civilization has collapsed. But it's not surprising. That's actually the way of history. In history, every great civilization has collapsed, and always for a similar set of reasons, none of which have we changed. And we've actually accentuated them in modernity, as we'll talk about in a second. But for the first time, our civilization has two new demarcating characteristics. Anybody in the chat box, what are they? The civilization is global. So when it collapses, the whole thing collapses because it's interconnected, interdigitated, interintimated, intertextured civilization, right? What Nassim Taleb calls fragile, right? It's a complicated, fragile system, which is vulnerable, and everything's interconnected from currency, right? To, I mean, just take just a simple and silly example, right? Silly in that it's utterly silly that it should be true, but true. Right? Do you remember at the beginning of COVID where people couldn't get face masks made? The amount of people who died because there literally weren't face masks. How could it be that a global power, the United States, couldn't access face masks? And it has to do with how contracts are done with hospitals, right? Where supplies happen, how the international system moves, how the exchanges happen. But the core that we just want to kind of just notice is that we've got a global civilization, and two, we have a civilization defined by exponential technology. And exponential technology, right? If we'll make a simple equation, exponential technology equals exponential suck, right? Meaning exponential technology destroys the planet. We're not talking about bows and arrows, but we're also not talking about mere B-52 bombers. We're talking about, right, a level of technology available to an enormously high number of non-state actors. Today, probably 5 to 10,000 people have access to this technology instead of 5 states, right? Right, half of those people are non-state actors. So we've got exponential technology, right, of various kinds, whether we're talking about advanced nanotech, whether we're talking about infotech, whether we're talking about biotech, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Right? We've got an enormous array of technologies, all of which with catastrophic potential implications based on very, very careful study. And we spent an enormous amount of time reviewing each one of these. So we're at, wow. So we've got a global civilization. All civilizations collapse. We now have a global civilization. We have a civilization with exponential tech. We haven't solved the old problems, and we have a set of new problems that come from the narrative of modernity. And the narrative of modernity, right, is very simple. A very simple narrative. It's a very simple story. And the story is you live in a success story. You live inside of a success story. Every single person listening on the phone, all of us, we live inside of a success story. And success means for us not what it meant in pre-modernity, meaning until the Renaissance. Until the Renaissance, it meant obedience with or to a set of principles articulated by your religion or your religion in alignment with a particular state. So obedience and alignment with those principles articulated by your particular local religion, that was success. Modernity says, no, you're actually not limited or defined by any of those contexts. You're a free-floating individual, which in many ways was a great liberation, right? And we overcame the great cruelties of the shadows, right, of the pre-modern religions. But this free-floating individual, what's his or her notion of success? Success means you're in a success story. The success story is governed by a win-lose metrics. It's a win-lose metrics. It's based on rivals conflict, win-lose metrics, success story. That is the animating story of modernity across the world. That's a universal frame that everyone lives in. But that frame itself, right, is direct cause to exponential growth curves, to extraction models, right, to fractional reserve banking, right, in all of its shadows, right, to a gap between have and have-nots that's unimaginable and growing, right, and to a level of depression spreading around the world, right, as a core root disease, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've talked about, and the reason I'm saying et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is because the last 2 sessions, we actually amplified et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this enormous set of risks, right, that bring us to a place where, let's say, according to Toby Ord, right, we have in the next X amount, 100 of years, and he did the hard math at Oxford, right, Toby basically said it's 50-50. but not as a casual guest, not as a pundit, based on crunching all the numbers, right, and examining the 10 major lines of existential risk, right, and what are the different possibilities, and doing kind of a very kind of serious actuarial analysis, right, Toby comes to the conclusion 50-50. I mean, I just want to get what that means. If you're, right, and we said this the last 2 times, and this is the end of my review, and I did it, Gabrielle, I hope slow enough this time, so we could kind of track it, okay? So track with this for a second. I mean, if you didn't just faint, then you missed it. I just want you to get what that means. So the best readers of the situation today, right, looking at the kind of careful analysis, are suggesting that within X hundreds of years, we have a 50% chance of the 6th mass extinction. That's a shocking piece of news. Now, and I want you to get what it means. What does it mean there's no future? And if you do the math, right, there are trillions of people who should still be born. So just get what that means. You get the stillbirth we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a level of just the future disappears. So all of the goodness, all of the truth, all of the beauty, all of the creativity, all of the depth, right? All of that gone. Now, the only people who are actors, right? The only people who have a voice in the future's only voice is who? Is us. The only voice the future has is us, right? We're actually the voice of the future. So it's our invitation, it's actually the demand of this moment of history, that we actually realize there's a covenant between the generations. And the covenant between the generations means we stand in deep relationship to the past. And the nature of that relationship, we're not going to talk about now, but it's an important relationship, a critical one. We receive the best of what the past had to offer. We continue, right, the evolution of consciousness. Every generation is responsible for its evolution of consciousness. And we stand at this pivoting point, borrowing Rilke's phrase, in which for the first time in human history, we stand at the precipice of an abyss, right, poised between utopia and dystopia, right, but not in the Da Vinci moment, right, where the Black Death in the end is going to be over, but actually armed with exponential technology, right, in a completely fragile universe, a complicated system, right, governed by rivalrous conflict, win-lose metrics, which animates our success story, which then fuels all of the existential risk factors, and everyone's going about business as usual. Wow. Wow. Okay, so that's where we are. And here's the good news, and it's really good news, and it's really beautiful. See, the same way we stand poised between or before, if you will, a potential dystopia, we also stand poised before an unimaginable renaissance, an unimaginable period, right, in human history, at a utopian possibilities. We actually have the ability to talk to each other, right, to communicate, but actually, if we actually develop new interior technologies, if we actually respond to existential risk by doing what? By telling a new story, okay? By telling a new story. That's what Da Vinci did. And that's how we started, just a few minutes ago, to be precise, 20 minutes ago. So a third of our time is done, right, in the introduction, right? What Da Vinci did is he told a new story. Now, what we need to do is, at this moment, we need to tell a new story again. The story of modernity, right, the win-lose metrics, the success won't work, right? The rivals conflict won't work. That's brought down every previous civilization. Now we're a global civilization with exponential tech. Won't work. So we've got to tell a new story. Now, what I want to do today is actually try and touch with you, right, the beginning of the new story. I'm going to add just 2 more words to conclude part 1. If I had to sum up in a second, that will bring us into part 2. So if I had to sum up for a second, what is the kind of diagnostic of where we are today, right? So I'd say, and I'm choosing these words carefully, and we'll see by the end of our conversation today, which is in about 39 minutes, so hold on to your seat. Right? By the end of our conversation, the sentence will become more clear, but I would say we're experiencing a global intimacy disorder, right? And the global intimacy disorder is the generator function for, is catalytic of either global action paralysis. There's a kind of global action paralysis, or, excuse me, often worse, global action confusion, right? So in order to respond, right, to this global intimacy disorder, and what does the global intimacy disorder cause? What's it cause of? It's cause of a failure of common will. There's not a common will, right? There's not global coherence. Now you think, well, big deal. Well, it is a big deal because all of our existential risk factors are global. Like, you cannot deal with any of the existential risk issues, whether it's climate, which is the least of them, or it's actually regulating artificial intelligence, or whether it's rogue terrorist threats, right? Or whether it's, right, the fundamental fragility of the economic systems and their collapse, or whether it's, and I'm going to skip the et cetera, because that's what we did the last two times. But however you tell this story, there's a fundamental need for coherence, right? If we don't have global coherence, we can't deal in global issues. Simple. If we don't have a common will, now you can't have a common will unless you have a shared story, because a shared story generates intimacy. You know, one of the things that, you know, I do, not as a major dimension of my life, but I just do it very occasionally, right? For people that you know, that I love dearly, is step into the world of a couple, which is very beautiful, right? The world of a couple is a very beautiful world. And one of the things you notice in the world of a couple is the core dissonance is always when there's no shared story, right? Each person in the couple has their story of how they got there. They've got their narrative, right? And they keep telling themselves their story. And of course, they're good lawyers, right? They're always adducing evidence, right, for their narrative, right? And at a certain point, if there's a large enough diversion in story, if the stories are too fundamentally different, then intimacy and ultimately coherence, right, breaks down in the relationship. And the way to restore the relationship, to evolve the relationship, always is to restore intimacy. And how do you restore intimacy? You don't restore intimacy with 6 sexual exercises, with all due respect to 6 sexual exercises, which is a different conversation. We're too early in the salon for that. That's a few salons from now. But that's not, right? Sexuality is not about intimacy. Intimacy is about eros. And as we're going to see in about 9 minutes, there was 12 billion years of eros before there was any sex. Right? So intimacy is a subset of eros. We'll talk about eros, right, in a few moments. But to restore intimacy means you've got to restore a shared story, right? A shared vision, a shared story, a shared understanding. So if we don't have a shared global story, if we don't have a shared global narrative, and we're confronted by existential risk, all of which is global, which requires global coherence in order to respond to it, but we can't achieve global coherence because we don't have a common will. We don't have a common will because we don't have a shared story. So therefore we have a global intimacy disorder. Does everyone get that? It's kind of clear, right? And global intimacy disorder generates one of two things, either global action paralysis or global action confusion. Both of them were in rampant abundance, right? All through COVID-19, okay? So now it gets really clear. And what I tried to just do now is in the last 5 minutes, summarize 10 years of work at the center so you get a sense of it. So what we've concluded is that you can't actually address existential risk only through governance or only through politics or only through forms of economics or only through, right? None of those are going to work. What you have to do is you have to address the root cause, right? The root generator function of existential risk is a failure to articulate a shared story that can actually generate global coherence. So therefore, our Comedian lever, give me a lever, right? The right lever in the right place, I'm going to change the world, is the telling of a new story. And friends, it's always been that way, right? The articulation of a new story changes, right? Everything is transformed because we all live, Charles Taylor, great book, Sources of Self, right? We all live in inescapable frameworks. And the inescapable framework that I live in, from which I generate reality from within the story I live, even if that story is invisible, even that story is not in any way conscious to me. And the story we live in now is this rivalrous conflict, win-lose metrics, success story. Okay, good, everyone good? How's everybody doing? Okay, you ready to rock? That was just introduction. We were just saying hi. That was just like a little hello. Hi, okay? Part two, who's up for part two? I'm just gonna check the chat box for one moment. Yay, okay, everyone good? So part two, here we come. Here we come, okay. So, and in some sense, those of you who've been with us since the beginning, right, and we're not opening this up to the public, we're looking for a few good people, right, to be at the core of the think tank in Miami, joining with the think tank around the world. And our vision is that Miami becomes Florence, if you will, maybe Florence and Jerusalem together, right? This Mecca, now we've got a third city, let's be universal here, right? But there's this sense of Renaissance, right? There's the sense that we're going to create this inner circle, right, of creativity, of cogency, right? Not a kind of regressive fundamentalism, but not a kind of new age human potential movement, serious thinking, right? Deep thought, right? Working with the best people around the world to articulate this vision of a new story. Now, again, when we say a new story, let's go now part two. We're now in part two. When we say a new story, what we mean is not a fanciful conjecture, not a declaration. We're not declaring something. We're not making a claim. We're actually grounding everything we said and will say in the best validated insights based on valid methods of gathering knowledge within all the major wisdom streams of pre-modernity, modernity, and post-modernity, integrated into a new whole greater than the sum of the parts. That's what we're doing. So we're taking the best validated insights in all of the wisdom streams in pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, integrating them into a new whole, right, which is the new story, okay? So nothing can be said because we just claimed it. It's always got to be based on, right? So you might say that there are thousands of footnotes to every sentence we're going to say. And in fact, the center of our work in the think tank is to write what we're calling the Great Library. And we're in the middle of it. We're 15 volumes in. And think Darwin, Marx, Freud, right? Darwin, Marx, Freud, right? They actually changed Einstein, 4 names, right? Who else have you heard about in the 20th century, right? 4 new ways of thinking, for better or for worse, that changed the 20th century. That's the level of thought we need to do. And it's the level of thought we are doing. So it's crazy exciting, right? And wildly necessary and ecstatically urgent, right? There's a sense, not of fear, but of urgency, but the privilege of having a seat at the table together. There's a sense of ecstatic urgency and a sense of enormous, enormous joy at having a seat at the table and great concern. So it's all of it together. My teacher, who died 150 years ago, he was a great master in a particular lineage tradition. He said, you've got to laugh out of one side of your mouth and cry out of the other side of your mouth. So you ready to go, everybody? Here we go. So we need to look at, right, to reconstruct our story. Now, the next year, every month, we're going to do a new piece of the story. In a certain sense, we're finishing now 2.5 times in, we're finishing the introduction. We're finishing the context. Now we're diving into the story itself. So to articulate this story that will overcome the global intimacy disorder, right, what we need to do is to identify what narratives matter in this story. So I want to identify 5, okay? 1, we need a new universe story. A new universe story answers the question of where are we, right? Where are we? 2, a corollary of the universe story is we need a new narrative of identity. But again, when I use the word narrative, I'm not using it in the kind of vapid postmodern sense, right? Made up, contrived, fiction, social construction of reality. No, meaning narrative, meaning the best integration of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern thought across all wisdom streams, right? Integrated into a new whole. That's what I mean by narrative, okay? So we need a new universe story, 1. 2, we need a new narrative of identity. 3, we need a new narrative of we, not just, so universe story is where are we? Narrative of identity is who am I? The third narrative is narrative of communion. Who are we? Who are we together? Right? 3, 4, we need a story equal to our power, right? We have today the power of unimaginable proportions, right? Available at our fingertips, both individually, collectively, rogue actors and state actors, right? But unimaginable power. We need a story equal to our power. So we need a story of power, 4. And 5, we need a new narrative of desire. Now, each one of those deserves, and we'll get 1 or 2 salons, right? But for now, I just want to begin with the first one. And you're going to see they're all intertextured, interdigitated, inter-included. But let's begin just with the universe story. Okay, let's begin with the universe story. And we're gonna do more than you could possibly imagine in the next, X amount of minutes, right? About 18 minutes. So hold on to your seat. So let me throw at you a sentence. Okay, here's a sentence. Reality is not a fact. Reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story. That's big. One of the first principles and first values of reality is there's a storyline. There's a narrative arc to cosmos. I talked about that narrative arc last time. I will talk about it again next time. For now, I'm just going to hold it in abeyance. I'm just going to give you 60 seconds on it. Here's the narrative arc. It's a very big deal to get there's a narrative arc. Superficial science missed it and superficial religion missed it. Religion says you're being tested in this lifetime, right? But basically, it's about being tested here to get to the next world, different versions of that, right? Some better, some worse. Science says, right, we're actually trying to figure out how it works, right? There's a set of laws and we're trying to discern them. Neither of them are about a universe narrative, about a universe story. But imagine the following. Imagine that there's not 1 Big Bang, that there's 4, okay? Which is actually accurate. The first Big Bang is the explosion of the first singularity in which from no thing, nothing, creatio ex nihilo, right? From nothing, the singularity, which emerges the world of matter. That's the first Big Bang. And then the world of matter, right? The world of subatomic particles through galaxies and pressure waves and planets, right, emerges. And then this huge explosion again, this momentous leap, the second Big Bang. So the first Big Bang is the physiosphere, the world of matter. Goes through all of its stages of development. Then the Big Bang explodes again, a second Big Bang, a momentous leap. And we go from what? From matter to life, right? The emergence of life. We've moved from the physiosphere to the biosphere. The biosphere from the first cell moves through levels and levels and levels of development. And we spend an enormous amount of time in the think tank at each one of those levels, all of these levels of development. And then it explodes again. It explodes again, another momentous leap. And the biosphere has now triumphed in the noosphere, the world of the deep self-reflective human, right? The world of mind. Those are 3 Big Bangs. Now, check this out for a second. That's not the end of the story. Right? Implicit in the structure of reality is this narrative arc of cosmos. So Homo sapien enters at the 3rd Big Bang, the explosion from the world of life to self-reflective mind, from the biosphere to the nous, meaning mind, noosphere, as Desjardins called it. So now what happens? So now we did this trajectory, this developmental trajectory through levels and levels and levels and levels of the noosphere with enormous progress from pre-modern, modern to postmodern. And then we ran into the second shock of existence. First shock of existence, the individual human being is going to die. The death of the individual human. Second shock of existence, the death of humanity. And we realized something's got to happen. There has to be another momentous leap. There's got to be a new story, right? We need a vision of the new human and the new humanity. Right, Homo sapien has to triumph in a 4th Big Bang, which we're going to call Homo amor. Homo amor. Now, I'm not going to talk about Homo amor a lot today. I want to talk about the background of Homo amor. Homo amor incarnates this new universe story that I'm going to very briefly tell you. But the beginning of the universe story is that it's a story, right? That there's a narrative arc, that it's going somewhere, that actually matter, life, and self-reflective mind are not, right, as the superficial versions of reductive materialist dogmatic science tells us, are not dissociated from each other, but as the leading edges of science understand very clearly, right, they're actually deeply inter-included. There's actually a narrative arc to cosmos. It's a big deal. Reality is not a fact. It's not merely a fact, it's a story. But reality is not an ordinary story. And we're going to make a claim, not a Harlequin romance claim, not a fundamentalist religious claim or a religious claim of the fundamentalist kind, right? Not a superficial scientific dogmatic claim, but a claim based on the best integration of the validated insights and all the different wisdom streams, pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. We're going to make a big claim. Reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story. It's not an ordinary story. It's a love story. It's not an ordinary love story. It's an evolutionary love story. Or you might say it's an outrageous love story. So what does that mean? Okay, now let's stay close. Let's hold on really close, okay? Here we go. So there's a statement that articulated itself about 10 years ago as we were beginning the discussions at the think tank. And the statement goes something like this. And I'm not going to elaborate on it. I'm just going to throw it in the space, but I'm going to pick up one piece of it, and we'll pick up more of it in future salons. And the purpose of our salons, again, let me say it again, is not entertainment. It's to actually bring us together so we can actually engage this right together. Okay. I just admitted someone. So whoever I admitted, welcome. Okay. I just saw their name on top there, somebody. So welcome somebody. You're late. Okay. So here we go. We live in a world. Here's the statement. We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. Just feel it in your body for a second. We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. A Hebrew version in one wisdom tradition for outrageous love is ahava azah, a word used by the psalmist, David, father of Solomon in ancient Jerusalem. What's outrageous love? Rumi talks about outrageous love. Solomon talks about outrageous love. What's outrageous love? Outrageous love is different than ordinary love. Ordinary love is often a strategy of the ego between two human beings trying to navigate something. Outrageous love is not limited to the human world. Outrageous love is not mere human sentiment. Outrageous love is the heart of existence itself. And when human love participates in the larger field of outrageous love, when human love is not a social egoic construction, but it's an expression of the field of outrageous love, then it's a completely different experience. It's utterly different. Dante talks about the love that moves the sun and other stars. All right, it's the love, or the eros, if you will, that's the heart of existence itself. Now, when I say eros, what do we mean? Okay, it's an important word. So by eros, we mean, now let's stay really close. And if someone, in our gang, that I know, if someone's kind of take on a little chat box job, it'd be awesome. Okay, let's take on a chat box job. This is gorgeous. Okay, stay really close. Eros, right? Love. But by eros, we mean evolutionary love, meaning love that animates the entire evolutionary process. We mean outrageous love. It's a different quality. And again, ordinary love, if you've ever held a baby, okay, you've ever held a baby, right? So when you hold a baby with ordinary love, the baby just keeps crying. When the baby's crying, ordinary love, the baby's like, whatever. But hold a baby and you access outrageous love, the love that's at the heart of existence itself, moving through you, the baby just folds into you and just is completely at home. Hold someone's hand. When you hold someone's hand with ordinary love, a little clammy, kind of want to get your hand out of there. You're not quite sure how to do it. Maybe you could cut off your arm and just take it away, right? You're just not sure what to do, right? But when you hold hands with outrageous love, when you participate in that way in the heart of existence itself, you're in heaven. Eternity lives in that moment. Point, we can actually access outrageous love. Outrageous love is accessible. It's the heart of existence itself, and it's the love that moves the sun and other stars, Dante, and it's what moves everything, right? In one lineage tradition, it's called Hava lifnei bria, Hava lachar bria. Right? There's love before creation and love after creation. Love after creation is reactive. Love before creation is the love that initiates and animates the whole thing. So the claim that we're making, I'm going to ground it in another term, and I'm going to go back to the chat box. Anyone who wants to write for a second, is that reality is animated by eros. Reality is eros, and eros equals outrageous love. Eros equals outrageous love equals evolutionary love, different dimensions of the same quality. So what does eros mean? Right? So again, by eros, we don't mean sexuality. Sexuality is 12 billion years later. It's a particular expression of eros. What is eros? Eros is the fundamental movement of cosmos, which is as follows. Eros is reality's experience of radical aliveness, reality's experience of radical aliveness, moving towards, seeking, desiring ever deeper contact and ever larger wholeness. I'm going to say that again. And I'm going to introduce today two formulas. We're going to work with both of them, and we have exactly 18 minutes. Okay? So stay close. We need every minute, and we need every 30 seconds in every minute, and I just wasted 10 of those seconds. So here we go. So eros equals the experience of reality's radical aliveness, which can be moving in you, right? But it moves through all of reality, which moves towards, which seeks, which desires, meaning there's a quality of desire in reality. Alfred North Whitehead, the great mathematician who wrote Principia Mathematica with Bertrand Russell, talks about the appetition of cosmos, and that's because he was in England, right, in 1925, and you couldn't use the word desire. But reality has desire, appetition. Reality desires, right? Desire is a quality of reality, right? Our desire, this is closer to our narrative of desire conversation, which we're not having now, but our desire participates in the larger field of desire of cosmos. Reality is eros. Eros is the experience of radical aliveness in reality, seeking, desiring, and moving towards ever deeper contact and ever larger wholeness. Right? That's the operative principle of reality. Now, the four forces, right? The strong and the weak nuclear, the electromagnetic, right? The gravitational, right? Those are expressions of eros. So for example, gravity. So just gonna ask you a simple question. What's underneath gravity? Nothing. Gravity is just a word. We use words in science, and I'm a major mad lover of science. Right? And one of my great regrets, right, in the world, right, really profound regrets is I love physics and I'm missing certain pieces of the math to work out certain things. So I've got to rely on other people's mathematics. So physics is wonderful, right? So when we look at kind of how physics, whether it's classical or new physics, right, discusses gravity or quantum loop gravity, right, what is gravity? Just what's gravity? Gravity is just a word. Gravity means allurement. Allurement that's in relationship to autonomy. That's gravity. Electromagnetism, right? So 380,000 years, right, after the Big Bang, electrons, right, and protons are about 1,897 times bigger, right, than electrons, find they're not satisfied by themselves, and they have this enormous urgent longing for each other, and they come together, right? We call it electromagnetism, but it's actually a force of cosmos, right? It's an urgent force of allurement that moves cosmos. Cosmos is moved by allurement, right? That's eros. And it's the allurement that drives cosmos itself. And what does eros seek? Now stay close, friends. Eros seeks ever deeper intimacies. Okay? Now, for those of you who are with us the first two times, we're now deepening, right? We're slowing down, right? As we promised we would. We're diving in. Eros seeks ever deeper intimacies, but what's intimacy? So, and as I mentioned last time, right, anyone who says intimacy is into me, you see, gets shot. Sorry, but not in a sweet way, right? Because that's a particular dimension. Intimacy is a structure of cosmos. Intimacy is not merely a human experience. We've exiled intimacy to, number one, the human world, and number two, to a particular dimension of the human world. Usually intimate relations mean sexual relations. If we expand it at all, it stays in the human world. It means also emotional intimacy, and we're done. No. Right? Human intimacy participates in the intimate universe. It's we live in an intimate universe. And eros, which is seeking deeper contact and larger wholeness, right, is actually an expression of the movement of reality. And reality is, right, and now I'm doing serious sweep in science and integrating an enormous amount of information at the level of second simplicity in the next couple of sentences. First simplicity, sloganeering, ignore it. Complexity, you've done all the deep work. Second simplicity, right after complexity, you're saying something enormously complex, but in a very clear, simple way, which incorporates an enormous amount of information. So this is second simplicity. Reality is evolution, but evolution has a trajectory because it's a story. Reality is not merely a fact, it's a story. What's the story? The story is evolution. What's the trajectory of evolution, or what's the plot line of the reality story? The plot line of the reality story is the progressive deepening of intimacies. That's a shocking sentence. And it's the best read we have of science today, interior and exterior science, integrating the whole thing. Reality is the progressive deepening of intimacies, or said differently, reality is the evolution of intimacy. Now, I'm going to ask someone to help me in the chat box now, because now everything is for these next 11, 12 minutes. Okay. Actually 13. Okay. Everything's for these next 13 minutes. Everything was leading up to here. So what does intimacy mean? So we just offered an Eros formula, which is kind of the beginning of the relativity formula in exterior sciences, would be the Eros formula in interior sciences. We're now in the realm of interior science. Let's add to it the intimacy formula, which we just began to drop in the space last time. So what is intimacy? Here's a formula. Intimacy equals shared identity. Who's got this? Intimacy equals shared identity, right? Anybody got this? Suzette, Christina, anybody got this? Intimacy equals shared identity. If no one's got it, I'll get it, which is totally fine. Thank you. Perfect. You're awesome. Intimacy equals shared identity in the context of relative otherness. So let's see if we can get that in the chat box. Intimacy equals shared identity in the context of relative otherness. Let's see if that's going to come up there. I can get it, right? Awesome, right? Plus sign, see if we can get a plus sign, plus mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of pathos, plus mutuality of purpose. So it's intimacy equals shared identity in the context of relative otherness, plus mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of pathos, plus mutuality of purpose. Sharif, Suzette blew it away. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are an awesome team. Okay, so here we go. So what does that mean? So now here's what we have to show. And we got to show this in 11 minutes. We want to show that this intimacy formula is actually true, that it applies across realms of reality in kind of a shocking way. So let's see if we can do it, and do it kind of as briefly as we can. Here we go. I'm going to go through each one of these in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Okay, here we go. So intimacy equals shared identity. So let's look at that at the subatomic level. So you've got a proton, a neutron, and an electron. Each one has its own identity. Intimacy means, right? Intimacy is driven. Intimacy is a subset of Eros. What's Eros? Eros is the movement of reality, seeking, desiring, moving towards ever deeper contact and ever larger wholeness. So Eros animates the subatomic particles. They move towards each other, right? The proton, neutron, electron come towards each other, right? In this field, right? They form a new whole. It's a new whole, the electromagnetic field. They form a new whole. That new whole is a shared identity. It's called an atom. Building block of reality, an atom. An atom is the movement of a proton, neutron, and electron coming together in a shared identity, but it's a shared identity in the context of otherness, meaning the proton, neutron, and electron don't disappear. They still exist in their probability spaces. So you've got a shared identity in the context of otherness. Now, in that shared identity, there's a mutuality of recognition. The proton, neutron, and electron, they recognize each other right, at a subatomic level, right? They actually feel each other, mutuality of pathos, and they have a new function, a new shared purpose, a mutuality of purpose. So an atom is a result of the movement of Eros in reality towards deeper contact and larger wholeness, which generates a new intimacy, which equals shared identity in the context of otherness, plus mutuality of recognition between the subatomic particles, mutuality of pathos, we feel each other, we're allured to each other, we feel each other, we're responsive to each other, plus mutuality of, anybody? Right, mutuality of purpose, a new function, a new purpose. Now, stay close. That's example one. Example two. Example two. Look at nations in the world. Now let's jump, right, from the world of matter into the human world. Huge jump. Nations of the world. Right, so what are we looking for? We're looking for a world in which, instead of different nations in the world being dissociated from each other, they can create a larger, intimate coherence on the planet. What would that mean? That would mean that nations would have to come together to create a larger shared identity than their ethnocentric identity. There's a larger shared identity. When I move from ethnocentric, a felt sense of care and concern only for my people, my group, my nation, to world-centric consciousness, meaning a shared sense of pathos, feeling, shared identity, shared care and concern for every human being on the planet, right? So the movement from ethnocentric to world-centric identity, right, is the movement from the narrow identity of one nation to a shared identity and a felt and mutuality of pathos recognition and a shared purpose among the nations. The move from ethnocentric to world-centric consciousness, that's an evolution of intimacy. And what does intimacy mean at the level of nation? It means the exact same thing that it means at the level of subatomic particles. And that's when you begin to realize we're talking about a universe story. That's actually shocking, right? At the level of nations, intimacy means the same thing that it means the level of subatomic particles. That's important. Now we're talking structure. Now we're not talking wisdotainment. Now we're not talking, let's do some self-help and see what we can get out. Let's actually transform the world and see what we can pour in. And we've got to pour in is, right, this new vision, right, of what? Right, a new story. What kind of story? A universe story. What's the universe story? Reality is not a fact, it's a story. What's the plot line of the story? The evolution of intimacy. What is intimacy? Intimacy equals shared identity in the context of otherness, plus mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of pathos, plus mutuality of purpose. But if you just make that up, guys, aren't we just making, no, we're not making it up. The same tenets of intimacy govern reality at the subatomic level as govern reality at the level of nations, meaning when I move from ethnocentric identity to world-centric identity, I'm actually moving from ethnocentric intimacy to world-centric intimacy, meaning the nations foster a new shared identity, a world-centric identity. We have a global identity in the context of otherness, meaning the individual nations don't lose their distinction. The individual religions don't lose their beautiful distinction. So it's shared identity in the context of otherness. There's genuine mutuality of recognition. We actually recognize each other. We feel each other, right? We rejoice in each other. Recognition is the movement beyond loneliness when I actually feel received and seen. And we feel each other, right? So if one nation, for example, has, right, massive amounts of starvation, and the other nation, right, is throwing away, right, just the amount of food thrown away in Miami per year, right, could feed one destitute nation, right? There's actually a mutuality of pathos. We feel each other, right? So there's a distribution, there's a reorganization, right, of course, structures of governance. We feel each other, and we have a mutuality of purpose, right? We're one world, we're one breath, we're one love, we're one heart, right? So that's the sense of intimacy at the level of nations. But let's keep going. Let's look at it in the context of a couple. Third example. What's intimacy in a couple? Same thing, right? It was Jackie, right? And it was Tom. And then Jackie and Tom come together as a couple. So Jackie and Tom, whatever their last name happens to be, is not the issue. And that's not the issue. The issue is, do they have a shared identity? Whether they call themselves Smith Wesson or Wesson Smith, who cares? Right? The point is they've got a shared identity. They're coming together as a couple. There's no longer just Jackie or Tom. There's a shared identity, but it's in the context of otherness, right? It's not fusion, right? It's not a giving up of irreducible uniqueness, right? It's not the collapse of autonomy, right? It's shared identity in the context of otherness, of distinction, but it's relative otherness because that which unites us, right? The oneness, right, of our fundamental consciousness, right, is greater than that which divides us. So it's shared identity in the context of otherness, and it requires a mutuality of recognition that we can actually receive each other's irreducible uniqueness, each other's soul print, this sense of right? Being able to share my soul print, if you will, with another person, which is the movement beyond loneliness, mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of pathos. We feel each other. I feel you and you feel me. And then I feel you feeling me, and you feel me feeling you, right? And I feel you feeling me, feeling you, and you feel me feeling you, feeling me, right? Right? There's this mutuality of pathos plus mutuality of purpose. We have a shared vision. And we're going to talk about each one of these dimensions, but you just see the same structure, and it starts to get a little shocking. You begin to become at home in the world in this very dramatic way, right? The same structure, the same tenets of intimacy that apply. I mean, it's shocking, that apply at the level of subatomic particles, apply at the level of nations, and apply at the level of a couple. Let's keep going. Okay, 4. Okay, 4, 8:07, 3 minutes. 4, just look at yourself. Remember Walt Whitman? I contain multitudes. Actually, there's so much in me. There's so many sub-personalities in me. Right? There's so many voices in me. And we split off those voices. Right? There's the voice of the controller, and there's the wounded child, and there's the protector, right? And there's the grandee, right? There's all these voices. But actually, what it means to become intimate with myself is I create a shared identity with all the dimensions of myself. Right? I contain multitudes, and now all of a sudden, all the split off parts are reintegrated. I now have a shared identity in the context of otherness. I can distinguish the different voices within me. There's mutuality of recognition. The voices talk to each other. The controller talks to the wounded child. Right? The protector talks to the hero. Right? Right? There's mutuality of recognition. There's mutuality of pathos. I'm not hijacked by one voice. Right? The voices feel each other, and then they can actually operate together coherently in mutuality of purpose. Now look what just happened. The same tenets of intimacy that govern an individual nation, a set of nations, right? That govern a couple, that govern subatomic particles, right? That govern, right, parts of self, right? Same tenets of intimacy. Last example. We're going to end with this. Okay? We're going to end with this. Last example. Look at values. Look at values. Values need to be intimate with each other, right? So for example, what does that mean? So what's the definition of extremism? 90 seconds. Extremism means, if you're an extremist, it means you can't have too much of your own value. Whatever your value is, you can't have too much of it, right? Death for an extremist is compromise, right? It's death. So extremism says I have a good value, number one. Number two, you can never have too much of my value. Example, let's take abortion. 2 values, pro-life, pro-choice. That's an absurd framing, right? Are all the life people against choice? Are all the choice people against life? But each side in this debate chose a value, life or choice, and said you can never have too much of my value, right? So that's non-intimate. So there's a non-intimacy between life and choice. Does everyone get that? Right? To create a larger value structure, you need shared identity. And as choice and life have to be part of the same shared identity in the field of value. They're part of the same field of value. They're both values in the field of value in the context of otherness. And they've got to recognize each other, those 2 values. They've got to feel each other, those 2 values, and they got to create shared purpose. Wow. Now we've applied the same intimacy formula to a 5th dimension, right? Across the realm, right, of value itself. Now, what does that mean? Let's finish here. We live in an intimate universe, and reality itself is the evolution of intimacy. Wow. And that intimate universe literally lives in us. Now, what that means, the last sentence, the intimate universe lives in us, that's a hard scientific sentence. I'm going to bracket for now. I'm going to hold that. But let's just see where we've gotten. We've actually begun to address a new story. Reality is not just the movement from simplicity to complexity. Reality is a story, has a plot line. Reality is the evolution of intimacy. And you can actually trace the trajectory of reality and actually see the progressive deepening of intimacies across all lines of development in all fields, all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. And here's an example, last sentence, and it's now 8:11. We're 1 minute over. So we got 30 seconds. Okay. Open up a book of my colleague, Yuval Harari, Homo sapiens, none of this is there. The story he tells is a reductive, materialist story. It's attractive because at least somebody's telling us a story and putting it together. It's actually devastating. Right? It's a story in which there's no evolution of intimacy. There's no first values and first principles, right? There's no, right? None of it, it's all gone. So imagine that we weren't telling a story of Homo sapien, we're telling a story of Homo amor. We actually retell human history, retell human economics, retell human psychology, retell attachment theory, right? Retell, right, all the hard sciences, the interior sciences, in light of this universe story in which I actually have a fundamental realization. I live in an intimate universe. Reality is the evolution of intimacy, right? And my intimacies, right, participate in the larger evolution of intimacy. Let's hold here. Okay. Pause.
Marc, thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. That was truly stunning. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute one at a time, or you can also just type into the chat box. But I'm sure there are questions out there. It's just such fascinating information.
Yeah, slow and gentle. Welcome, everyone. And anyone who's got a question, a comment, an inquiry, and I know that we just did a huge sweep that we should have taken 10 hours to do, and we did it in one. So I appreciate the depth of your presence and listening. And don't worry, there's not good questions or bad questions, no such thing. So completely welcome. Anyone who has any thoughts, comments, alternative speeches, confessions, or jokes. Okay, what you got? Anybody?
Marc, this is Ken. How are you?
Hey, Ken, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Marc, here's my question, and I'm sure I don't totally understand your theory, but when you talk about like a global, what did you call it? An intimacy disorder.
Right.
Okay. How would, here we have an election, and I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but we can't even in our society come to an understanding as to who wins an election. Now, I know that you might attribute some of that to a one-loss mentality, but the problem really is we don't even now share a common narrative as to how we have a transfer of power. So how would your theory overcome that? It seems like we're more disharmony. There's more disharmony. There's less eros.
Fantastic question. Okay, I got you, brother. I got it. It's fantastic inquiry. Let's just say a couple of things. So one, right, I'm not espousing a theory. I'm actually espousing a meta organization of information, a theory, right, in which puts together multiple theories, right? There's many, many theories we've put together and a broader kind of fundamental framework of reality. So that's which is slightly different than it's a different move, but that's one. That's the minor point. Let's talk about the major point. What did you just describe, Kenny? So beautifully, you described, right, the results of modernity, which is a win-lose metrics, rivalrous conflict, success story. So what you just described is exactly what I said is the reigning narrative. That reigning narrative emerges out of the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance has many great dignities that it produces, but it also produces, there's the dignities of modernity and the disasters of modernity. This election is merely a amplified vision of the win-lose metrics, rivalrous conflict that governs the system. So what you're pointing to is exactly what we're saying, right? In our current system, we're animated by a particular kind of story, which is a win-lose metrics, rivalrous conflict. So on steroids, we've seen it, but actually it's not different, right? It's not fundamentally different than anything else. It's just the veneer has been taken off, right? The thin veneer, right, has been taken off, and it's now kind of out in the open in a much more dramatic way. Now, how do we change? We don't change by attacking this person or that person. We change by making the Da Vinci move. So the Da Vinci move at the time of the Black Death wasn't, how do I negotiate a treaty between Florence and Venice and Italy, or right, maybe Cordova, we'll get Spain involved, right, and figure out how to get those rivalrous conflicts in shape. No, what Da Vinci did was he said, let me articulate a new vision of reality, right, in which everyone naturally falls into place at a higher level of consciousness. So Da Vinci introduces the beginnings of what's going to become world-centric consciousness. It takes time. But what we need to do is we need to actually tell a new story. Now, one more sentence, sir, with permission. We've just begun. We've just created just the beginning of the framework. We're going to go 10 more steps, right, over the next year. But then those steps, right, just like democracy seemed impossible 1,000 years ago, if you would have said to someone 1,000 years ago, let's tell a new story about governance, right? 1,000 years ago, a new story about governance in which every person, just between you and me, Kenny, women as well, get to vote. Wow. Right? And they get to choose their leaders and allocate funds of the state. You get burned at the stake. It would be an utter absurdity because consciousness couldn't grasp it. And now a 7-year-old in the United States gets the democratization of governance. So imagine, right? And why? Because Da Vinci and his cohorts told a new story. And that new story allowed a new system of governance to come into being. So what we're doing is our job here is not, I have zero interest in a popular bestseller that sells 1 million copies, waste of our time, right? Unless what we can do is generate a new source code story. That's why we're writing a great library, not a popular book, not some guy's theory, right? This is actually a group of 50, 60 people from around the world, right? At the top levels in their fields that are coming together to articulate this new story. And at the core of the new story, there's this very elegant formula, this intimacy formula. Intimacy equals shared identity, right? In the context of otherness, plus mutuality of recognition, plus mutuality of pathos, plus mutuality of purpose. Now imagine this, and with this I end. It was a great question. Imagine, and this is what we're looking to do in the next 3 years. You can actually do this great work where you apply the intimacy formula to every dimension of reality. All 6 schools of economics, all the 11 schools of psychology, right? All the currency issues, right? You actually show the intimacy formula and its violation. It's at the core of everything. It's never been done. That's a Freud, Darwin, that changes reality, right? And then imagine, instead of telling Yuval Harari's story, which is a reductionist, materialist story in which Harari says, chapter 2, there's no difference between Libya's Gaddafi's Libya, or universal human rights. They're both pure fictions, pure social constructions, which you understand deconstructs the very heart of reality. Imagine we told a new story, not Homo sapien, Homo amor. Right? And you could actually read reality, right, based on an enormous amount of data, hard data, as the evolution of intimacy. We've now changed the source code. So it's a careful thank you. That's an awesome question. Thank you for the inquiry. And it's great to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yay.
Thank
Totally.
you.
Yay. Yay. Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you so much. Do we have 1 or 2 more? And there's no obligation for questions. And sometimes it's a lot of information. Often after I do one of these talks, people just want to integrate it. So it's totally, no, I feel totally fine whether or not people are ready with questions. But if you do, and you'd like to ask, I want to be available in a deep way. So anybody up here?
Hey, Dr. Camlet, it's hard to believe that you don't have something to say. I know you.
Sharif, Gabriel, any of our people?
That was great. That was a great session, and I think it's a lot of information to process. I do think that that one thing is maybe tying together what you just went through tonight and the end goal and how they relate.
Right.
So,
Right. That's great, Sharif. Right. The end goal, what you mean is of the center, what we're trying to do.
yeah.
Yes.
So what we just discussed tonight is building blocks towards an end goal, right? And maybe showing that nexus.
Yep, totally. So that's fantastic, Sharif. It's a beautiful place to end. And again, I just want to say to everyone, right? Generally, when we do this much information in an hour, right? People there's a little shell shock, and it takes like a couple of days to integrate and then to come back. So just relax, and I don't want anyone to feel like, oh my God, I should have a question. You shouldn't. Just hang out, relax, and if you have a question that comes up in the next couple of days, find us for sure. We're trying to kind of begin to create a shared language. So just to end in responding to Sharif's, really appropriate and, incisive inquiry, where are we going with this? To say it simple, like, why are we doing this? What's this about? Where are we trying to get? So we're trying to change the source code. We're trying to make a Da Vinci move, a Renaissance move, right, with this leading edge think tank to change the very source code of consciousness and culture. And the way we're doing it, right, is through, right, a great library. It's going to be about 30 volumes, but with Archimedean lever points. So here's, I'll just give this example because it comes off of what Cousin Kenny was saying, Sherry. So let's just take that book we mentioned by Yuval Harari, Homo Sapiens. It's a good example of a book which sold like 13 million copies, right? It sold to the kind of, intelligentsia of the world, to our decision makers, and it's enormously destructive, right? In that it doesn't hold that there's a field of value. It holds that all value is social construction, and it doesn't actually see development. It doesn't have an evolutionary line of development. It doesn't have a notion of the intimate universe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Its basic premise is reductionist materialism, which is, been blowing apart at the leading edges of science all over the place. It's an old, tired, shoe that's eventually going to be discarded. But that's what Yuval's coming from. Now, when you put that into the very center of society, right? Wow, what happens when we have artificial intelligence in 30 years and 90% of people don't have jobs, but you've got no narrative of who a human being is, right? What happens when the story of reality falls apart, when we don't have a shared story? So then when actually push comes to shove and existential risk starts to explode, we're going to lose 2 billion people, 3 billion people, right? Because we're not going to have narratives of identity, narratives of the universe that allow for a common will for coherent global action, right? The result in human suffering is unimaginable. And the real move we can make today is a Da Vinci move. Now, again, stay close with me, everyone, just the last 30 seconds. Lots of people in Venice, right, in Florence, in the Renaissance, they thought, what's these Da Vinci and his friends doing? They were involved in the politics of Venice, and they were doing philanthropy in Venice, and going to dinners, and they were doing their businesses, and they were great people, but they couldn't see it. They couldn't see around the corner. We're actually gathering a group of visionaries who can actually see right around the corner and understand very clearly where we're going, and all the information's there. We just have to step out of our kind of myopic existence and actually find our way to the information, which is not easy to do. I completely get that. It's an enormous broken information ecology, but we can take a seat at the table, right? And taking a seat at the table means to make that Da Vinci move, which is our responsibility and our joy as human beings, right? So it's an enormous joy and it's enormous responsibility. And if we don't do it, I can't even begin to describe the suffering that will ensue, let alone extinction. And the reason we look away is because it's too much. We can't quite hold it. But it's our invitation and our joy and our responsibility to actually exercise our imaginations and be able to see around the corner and take our place at the table of history. That's what we're here to do here in Miami, right? To actually engender that Renaissance. Remember, the Renaissance, total 1,000 people. So we're going to gather enough of us, right, joining from around the world to actually become the imaginal selves, right, who can actually imagine the new reality out of which, right, the destructive forces that destroy the old immune system of the caterpillar, right, become imaginal cells that find each other, that join together, and the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. So thank you. Ciao.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll send the link for next month for our salon. And really appreciate, it's great to see you all, and I look forward to interacting with all of you during the month.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sharif,
Thank you,
Gabrielle.
Mark.
You guys are awesome. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.